Hello, dear futurists, designers, creative thinkers, and change makers around the world. I'm Ekaterina, co-founder of Future London Academy. And today I've got a very special guest here with me, the wonderful, the fantastic, the amazing Timothy Goodman, who you probably seen his work on the walls, in the stores, on the products, because he worked with companies like Nike. He worked with Paul, he worked with, you name Tiffany, any company you probably could think of. Timothy done incredible work with them, as well as done lots of public art and just beautiful exhibitions, and just keeps creating, writing, journaling, and expressing himself in all mediums. So I'm very, very excited to talk about all these things today. But what's very exciting that we'll talk about the business of art as well, which is probably one of the toughest conversations. I'm looking forward to that. But before we start, how are you doing today, Timothy?
I'm well. I'm tired, a little jet lagged, but I'm well. I really like that you said expressing yourself because I like to think of myself as an expressionist, and whatever comes out of that, whether it is writing or spoken word poetry or murals or social experiments, have to get it out and express myself because I feel lonely in the world and I want to connect to other lonely people and I want to talk about human experiences. And so however that happens, however it comes out, whatever medium, that's how it has to happen. And so I'm honored to be here at Often to speak with you.
Well, we are very honored that we have you, as well as that you express yourself in all mediums, because I feel like the world does benefit a lot from your expression, because you touch on so many important subjects and more thoughtful and deep ideas than just art for the sake of art. But I would love to hear a little bit more about how did your process and everything that you've done change throughout the years, because obviously now you're incredibly successful in doing fantastic, huge, crazy big projects, but it hasn't been like that from the beginning. So did anything in terms of your process, thinking, or how you approach work change throughout the years?
Yeah, I mean, it has to. I think it's like you're a shark, you have to keep moving and moving, moving, or you'll die. So it's like, of course, there's been incredible evolutions, both stylistically, the way one works, and personally, of course, and how that affects the work and the topics and the ideas, and the approach to the work. I think that, early on you're just trying to figure it out. You're trying to get maybe some recognition on some of the work. You're trying to find your voice. And then at some point, I think for me at least, it shifts where I really think about the context of my work in the world, and that this is not just about making work for designers or design community or art community. It's about everyday people. We are in the business of consequence. All our work exists in the world for regular everyday people to interact with and to live with. And so how are we thinking about our work in that way, when you're creating, is very important to me. And so I want to make work accessible for people. I want to make work that is approachable, that makes them kinda connect to the human experience and yeah, so
And you do that very well. I think humans do connect to it, and they can definitely feel the feelings that you're trying to express, which is incredible. I wonder if when you started out, were there any particular challenges that you were facing? Obviously, now they're long gone, but were there at
there's
that
always challenge.
challenges?
There's always challenges.
What were the early challenges that you faced, and how did you solve them at that point?
I mean, there's just, when you're a young designer, trying to kind of find your voice, I think that there's just it's easy to get caught up in the end game, what something should be, and where you want to be, rather than just, believing in the questions at the moment, in the now, and, um diving into your craft, and to really work on your craft. And so I'm an inherently a very impatient person. All right. So, but I've let that kind of dictate my style, dictate my work, whether my writings. my drawings, my work, my lettering, like all of it has to come out in flux and very quickly, at least to begin with, and then I can like edit it and redefine it and kind of. But I need to like I want to get I'm impatient. I want to be finished. So, but I let that dictate the style, and I think that we as artists and designers, like it's important to let the your kind of to kind of like tap into your actual behaviors and let that dictate your work in a lot of ways.
I love how you talk about it because you said at the beginning you're very much an expressionist, and art, I think, should be an expression of what the person is thinking and doing. But I also like that you said it's also how you like working. It's not just what you want to say that is important for art. It's like if you are an impatient artist, then your medium should be very kind of easy, quick, and something you can get out. Or maybe you're more of a meditative artist, so the process needs to be long to get to
It's
it.
a labor, you know, and I'm not a laborer. Like I want, of course, I will spend countless hours on something to make it right. But I think in the at least in the beginning, the early stages has to come out in a very quick way. And then I like to like tinker, you know, but I don't know. It's interesting. It's like I want to make work about what's going on in the world. I never want to forget that we exist in a community. And I think so many of us forget that, myself included. And like I said, how something, whether you're creating a product, a book, a wall mural, we have an obligation to think about the context and that who is seeing this, who's interacting with it. Of course, you want to make work that comes from you first, and you don't let an audience dictate that. But it's also important to think about those kind of things. And so I don't know. That's kind of where I'm. So, you know, like for me, I like to make work that's very personal, very vulnerable, things about that are on my mind, things I'm going through, but also things that are really going on in the world, politically, socially, social economically, and to use my platform to talk about these things.
It's interesting when you were saying it. I think some people describe art as a, I suppose, a mirror you put to the world, and therefore it should reflect on the problems. Some are talking more about kind of looking the inside. And when you were talking about the balance of both, on one hand, reflecting what's going on in your world, but also reflecting the bigger context, I had this kind of a thought in my head. It's almost like a semi-transparent mirror that you are, where on one hand it shows a little bit of what's important to you, but also reflects everything that is happening around, like this, I don't know, some sort of a weird object that artists are. We started talking about the process, and I'm curious to know how the process evolved also from the team perspective. As you said, being an artist is a lonely craft, and creative in general, I think, can feel very lonely. Did you, throughout the year, start surrounding yourself, I don't know, with people who can help you on this journey, whether it is from a very technical perspective, having a PA or a team or a project manager or someone who manages your work to
Yeah.
kind of support this journey, or basically how your process evolved from the team perspective?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, you know, I think early on, I couldn't have a team because I was just, you know, my first 3 years after graduation of college, you know, design school, I worked as a book jacket designer for a year. Then I worked for Brian Collins at his agency Collins, which was insane redefining experience for the way I thought about work. And he is one of my favorite people to this day, one of my biggest mentors and inspirations. And then I went to go work for Apple for a year. So this all happened the first 3 or 4 years after graduating. And at Apple, I knew I had to go. Not just everyone told me I had to go, and I didn't wanna go inside, but I knew I had to go because I had to be able to find myself in a position where, I was doing something I wasn't happy with, and that pushed me. That was like a catalyst to finally push me to start making the work I really wanna make and to try to figure out how that can become a career for myself. You need these pressures to rub up against each other. So during the day I'm at Apple, I'm very unhappy. I'm making work I don't like, work that's very sterile. And that's not to slight anybody there. There's incredible creatives at Apple. But for me, you know, I had just did my first mural on the side. I was doing freelance work for magazines, for newspapers. I was doing these illustrative things, and I started to feel this like stimulation about the work I was creating on the side. So going to Apple and just making, these really, working with these product images and stuff, it was really hurting my soul, personally. And again, that is not to slight anybody who works there. But for me, and so I was running home every night to work on nights and weekends to, find freelance work. And I was working on I was a horrible employee, and but I had to go through this experience.
But do you feel like that contrast almost gave you the better perspective of how much you love
Yeah.
doing what you do?
Of course, and well, I also like, I was painting houses until I was 22, 23 years old in Cleveland, Ohio. I had no money. I did this for 5 years, hanging wallpaper. I remember I never forget hauling wallpaper glue up stairs for 15 hours a day. It never leaves me. Every day I think about that. So I don't take any of this for granted. But so I start doing this work, and it was so important for me early on to find my voice, but to figure out how to make this a business. But I just had to go step by step. So at the beginning, it was just like, okay, am I making enough money to pay my rent? That's where I had to start. Okay, so now I'm hustling. I'm trying to get freelance jobs. I'm trying to get more eyes on my first mural, my second mural, my third mural. How am I sharing this on social media? This is 2012, 2011, 2013 on email chains. And so it was just me at first, and slowly I had a manager for a couple years. That was a very interesting experience. It wasn't the right fit, but I continued to learn and learn. When you're an independent artist, which is what I call myself, commercial artist, whatever, it's easy for a lot of people to be nervous about asking for certain prices early on, but once you start to realize, and maybe I had an upper hand because I came from a branding background, so I understood how decks worked and how when I worked, we would hire freelance illustrators. I already kind of had more of a confidence early on to ask for certain kind of prices, or to think about the work in terms of like, is it full buyout? Or are you just using the art for a campaign? Is it exclusive rights? Or, so you start thinking about these things. In the beginning, of course, I think a lot of independent designers and artists make mistakes with that, and they get taken advantage of. And there were definitely some times where I did work that was, I wouldn't, I kind of gave full rights or something early on, and I wouldn't, and I learned from that. But I never thankfully had, a really awful experience where someone completely bought, paid nothing for my work, and then suddenly it was on like billboards or something. But
So to get a bit too technical,
yeah.
did you have contracts? Who wrote your contracts when you figure out, okay, there is things like rights and I can charge different things for different. So you had a context, but practically, how did you go about it? Did you hire a lawyer to write contracts for you? Was it your manager that you had at the time?
I think in the very beginning, before my manager, I wrote up kind of very basic contracts that probably had all sorts of like loopholes that they could have taken advantage of. But when I did get my first manager, when you have a manager is working independently, I mean, it's such a buffer so that I don't have to have animosity with the client. He can, or he or she, the manager can kind of like ask for certain things, or it's this tricky thing for anybody who's starting out in my position because you're trying to get more work, get more interesting opportunities, but also not charge too much so that you're not getting so that they want to go to somebody else, or that so you have to find this balance. That's why I always say my philosophy from the beginning was do one for them, do one for me. Do one for them, do it like they say that in acting, with movies. A lot of actors, famous actors will do that. They'll do this big blockbuster, and then they'll do like this independent movie that really like touches their soul, and maybe they don't make much money from that, but then they do a big blockbuster and it all balances out. So I've always had this mentality of, okay, I'll take this big job, and maybe sometimes it's very exciting. Sometimes, it's for a brand that is not, I don't find particularly exciting, or maybe the work is, they're asking for something very corporate or something. And so early on, I would do these things, but then I would always try to make time. A friend of mine always says, nothing is possible without making time for it. And it's so simple, but truly like, and that's a privileged statement because if you have a family or children or you have certain financial obligations, this is becomes very difficult. That's why I hate when people say, do what you love. Do it. Okay, yeah, like sure in theory, but it's not that easy. Like, what are the actual real life, implications that that takes on for certain kind of individuals? It's not everyone can do that. But if you can make time to find, to start working on tinkering on things on the side, it's very important. So I was always trying to do that at the same time that I started with the commercial work early on. How do I write? How do I post that? How do I share this? How do I do my first murals? I was doing murals in my apartment. I was painting walls, doing like sample murals to send to people, using your resources in any way that
I love how you said do one for me, do one for them. How do you measure one? So was it because, for example, with something like a mural, it might, I don't know, take longer than like, I don't know, a post or something. So when was it in terms of time? I spent 1 week working on a commercial project versus 1 week on something for myself.
you can't measure it by time. You can measure it by project. Sometimes the project might be a week or 2 weeks, or maybe it's 3 days. Sometimes I get asked to do things very quickly. That's helped me expand my practice too, because I want to get, sometimes there's no time and I want to try to get as much done as possible. So
Cool. Okay. So then I love this, by the way. And is it the same now, 50-50 balance? So you have more of for me versus for them? Or how does it work now?
it's tricky because brands will come to me for me to do my thing for them. So it's a little different. Not really. I mean, there's still plenty of things that I do, and that's the thing, I always tell people, like, I do things all the time that I never share on my Instagram, that I never put on my website, that, it is not to say that I'm not proud of that work, but there's levels to these things. So I do jobs for, I might do 10 office murals this year for agencies in New York or something, right? And I don't post all those just because they're kind of like, people are hiring me. They know I can come in and do a wall mural for 4 hours on their wall, and I can make good money and be done with it. And then we just move on. And it's like, there are these things that are happening all the time and sometimes I do a corporate job. Maybe I don't like how it came out. I thought, it would have a certain kind of something, it was going to go a certain way and it didn't. And that's okay. You just keep it moving. Like,
Love it. And I also love that you talk about these projects that we all, I think, do as creatives that are our bread and butter, something that we can do, we're good at, people love and want from us. And you can do fast without too much mental load, but it pays the bills and gives you more freedom to do things where you want to invest your time, maybe experiment more and maybe take more risk. Talking about risks, were there any early risks that you had to take throughout your journey that paid off, and what were they?
I mean, listen, anybody who quits their job to pursue working for themselves is taking a risk. And anyone who's making a living being a creative person, just paying their rent, you're performing a miracle, I think. And I want, like, anyone who's watching this, listening to this, like, I see you, like, it's important because I really, the society is not built for people to kind of like thrive in that scenario. It's a very interesting thing to be a creative person because you are constantly open for critique your whole life, from art school, design school. You're putting your work on the wall, people are critiquing it. You post it on Instagram, people are judging it, critiquing it behind the scenes. You have an art director who's shooting down your work or liking your work, or for me, I have clients. Sometimes I might do something or pitch something else that they don't like. And that takes a real toll on someone's psyche, I believe, through the years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of that. I don't know. I lost my train of thought, actually.
Well, we're talking about risks.
I just think that, like, anyone who's just quitting their job, working for someone is a huge risk. One of my biggest risks was early on, the first couple times that I used my personal life in my art, 40 Days of Dating, talking about my relationship problems and habits. And then we went on, Jessica and I made another project called 12 Kinds of Kindness, these social experiments that were so much, I talked about meeting my biological father for the first time. And I talked about, you know, all these insecurities and fears I had. And then once that we kind of did that, it did feel like a massive risk at the time. Like no one would ever hire me. I mean, I was just starting out. I just started getting like commercial jobs and murals. This is like 2013. And I thought, and for about 6 months, everything kind of dried up a minute. And I think that there was this weird moment where I don't know, it was too much. I was so open. And then I said, fuck it. I've already opened the door and I wanted to create more work like this. So I started writing about these things and I'd always written poetry and I started posting all these writings and things on Instagram and constantly using this as a practice, using Instagram, social media as a way to share kind of sketches and things like thoughts and things I was going through. I had to keep pushing through. And I think it felt like a huge risk at the time and eventually it paid off, because then I had a Unical collection that was with all these writings I had been doing and and drawings and then I start taking these drawings and putting them on walls, these writings and putting them on walls and then brands are hiring me to do that. And so I started kind of utilizing the personal with the commercial and making it all kind of like blend together in ways.
It's so interesting what you just said, and thank you so much for sharing that because I remember when your project of ours, Jessica Walsh, came out as a designer. I remember how we with the team looked at it and thought, huh, we never thought as designers to talk about the personal thing because it was always design is solving a problem, someone else's problem.
Uh, I think in the design community.
So I remember how refreshing it was to see. And I wonder if it felt the same in your head. Obviously, for design community, felt like, whoa, someone just broke that wall and kind of this new thing just appeared. But on the other side, you were not sure where it's leading. And as you said, like if the projects were not kind of coming your way for the next few months, it must have been very scary. And I wonder at that point, how did you know this was the right decision? So I should push forward 100% versus, okay, I made a mistake. You know what? Let me erase this and go different direction.
Well, two thoughts. I think that when we did that project, Jessica and I were so young, starting out. I mean, maybe 5 years working professionally, 4 or 5 years. And like, I think that there, what I would say 90% of like was great, that people loved it or whatever. But there were definitely this core group of designers who were criticizing it, and that's fine. I enjoy criticism. I think it's really important to listen to criticism actually. And not everyone loves everything. I love certain kind of music. I love Bob Dylan. You might hate Bob Dylan's voice. That's fine. Like this is what art is about, right? But it's you definitely enlist, especially when it's coming from your community, you internalize it. It can hurt, it can sting. But knowing how much it connected to people outside the design community, because it went viral, this project, how many just regular people connected to this project we created, how many people, my mom's friends, like just random people, like walking down the street, people like, who have nothing to do with, who are not in the creative world at all, connecting so much to it. It was like a light bulb went off. It was like, this is it. This is I have to make work for people and I want to. And so that's what, and so, I really like the last 4 or 5 years since maybe like 2019, I really switched gears to thinking about like making work. Keith Haring said something like he thought like after all, like art was to contribute to culture, and he's a big inspiration of mine. And I couldn't agree more, like I want like partnering with schools and kids and communities in New York and all over and making public art and making art for institutions. Like I want to like it becomes like a sense of, I talk about in my talk, like this ownership for people, for communities. It's their art. It's not mine, and being able to kind of create these things, for my community means everything to me. And so these things have all kind of like, I don't know, I think I'm rambling, but yeah, I think it lines up with what happened at that 40 days moment. How it really just, there was no turning back, I was just like, I have to.
Well, I'm glad you did because it definitely led you to all these new projects and ideas that definitely resonated with even more people and worked out in the end.
And like I said in my, people don't have to like that. That's, it's not for everybody. And maybe it's even debatable whether it is design, some of this. you know? I mean, it is my graphic memoir that came out last year. I always think it's forever. It's this, book of 192 pages, and it's about how I went to Paris, fell in love, and tried to learn French and felt heartbroken. And it's graphs and it's charts and it's poems and but it's all rooted in the tools I learned as a graphic designer, first and foremost. I just think it's interesting, like all these definitions and boundaries we put on ourselves or expectedness. And I don't know. Yeah.
I love it. And I love how many different types of projects you do. As you said, you don't limit yourself to any medium or any kind of type of thing that you do. And you express yourself through so many different ways. I also wonder how much of it is planned versus happens in the moment. Again, especially now that you have potentially more things and projects that you can handle. Do you plan your year or month or whatever quarter up front of like, I want to publish at least one book. I need 3 big clients to survive financially. I need like, do you have some sort of things? Or is just go with the flow and see what happens and kind of comes your way? And
Yeah, I'm very much I think I'm a go with the flow person. Of course, there will be things that happen because schedules happen, or it's like, oh, this project's gonna happen, or I have, this is due. My book was due. I had months to create it, and there's due dates. Usually, it starts with like some anxiety about like I don't have something, or oh, I really want to do this, but I don't know how to do this. Like, I've been thinking forever about certain projects I want to start to create, but I haven't. They're still just like on like my notes app, and but no, I have not. I have not. There's no. I don't plan anything.
so then how do you select, as you said, you have probably unlimited kind of ideas and some in your notes, some in your head. Then you kind of can work 24 hours and never stop. So I suppose some wisdom comes at some point that, okay, there are some limiting boundaries in day and night, and especially with the new movement of slow productivity and how we should kind of maybe reevaluate how much work we actually need to do. How do you decide on that? If you don't have a lower limit of things that you have to do, what's your upper limit of like, okay, I shouldn't do more than that?
It sounds nice in theory but there's always, I think, is when you're working for yourself. Also, I never say I'm a freelancer. It's very important. I've never said that since day one. I hate that. As an independent person who runs a business, even though I don't, that's why I have one manager, and manager has an assistant, and I hire assistants for myself on projects, just project based, depending on what, so maybe I need to I'm doing an animation with a client, with a brand. Maybe they have an internal team. Maybe I bring in an animator that I know to, or I have interns and assistants when I'm doing big murals. Sometimes I might have an assistant for 3, 4 months at a time. Sometimes I don't.
Where do you find these people?
In New York, like, or if I'm traveling, sometimes like I do, I was just in San Diego doing a big mural. So I just put on my Instagram, like, hey, I'm looking for people like designers in San Diego, help me. So, using social.
Again, sorry to be very technical, but I feel like this is something, I mean, building a team is a hard thing. It sounds very easy. Just how do you evaluate? Is it a good person? Is it mainly you get through recommendations?
Recommendations I get, and I look at the work, and sometimes it's not even about the work for some of this stuff, because it's like maybe we're working on site doing a big mural and I need them to help me tape and video me and whatever. So it's about just finding people who feels like the right vibe. Like I can't, you just get,
You get on a call with them to feel the vibe? How do you check the
you
vibe?
see the work, you see, maybe someone recommends them. I don't know. It happens different ways all the time. But I'm a very just like play it off the cuff kind of person when it comes to all that. It's funny because I never, like, when I first started working for myself, it's now about 12 years. I always said from the beginning, I never want to have like a studio. Like I never want to have my name like on a door. That was not important to me. I just want to be an independent person, but now I'm getting to a place where my name on a door, but it's still kind of just like me, because no one can do what I like. I like that. Like I like being like a specialist, like being able to get hired to just do, like no one can interpret, like no one
So
can.
you don't want to be like Jeff Koons, who has like a team of doing his work, so he just comes up with ideas.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I like the craftsmanship of it, It's like really important to me. It makes me, I don't know, listen, like I said, like I think I'm like inherently like a lonely person in this world, and I'd like to be able to make things that with my hands because it helps me feel connected to something. Even though I think we're all just gonna die, it doesn't matter, you know? So why not just like be able to feel this mental, physical, emotional stimulation of creating something while I can, you know? And maybe I feel a little bit more connected to life.
I love this philosophy, and definitely, well, it seems like you're enjoying the process, which is, I think, the most important thing with any job. We were just discussing with few other founders and especially of creative agencies, how we all go into this world of creativity because we love it, and then somehow find ourselves being anxious and stressed, and sometimes thinking like, why exactly are we enjoying ourselves right now? Even like doing talks at these conferences, it sometimes can feel very stressful in the moment, and we constantly need to remind ourselves, actually, this is the life, this is the joy of the moment. We decided to do that. We wanted to do this, so we should enjoy the process of it. But in the moment, it's very difficult because there are so many external pressures that, and I don't know how it feels for you now through the lens of experience in the years. Does it get less stressful and anxious to work on, in general, like having the workload and or working on particular projects? Like,
I mean, in ways it gets easier because you're just better at it. And you cut out the BS in a way that maybe you didn't do when you were younger. And maybe you say no to certain jobs, you know, that you would have said yes to. And you can kind of, you know, what kind of client works or what doesn't. You only have so much time. So that does happen, of course. But then at the same time, like I want to have more of a personal life now than I used to have, you know? I'm in a very healthy relationship, you know, with my partner for 3 years, and that's important to me, where in the past, maybe I would have just been working constantly, you know? And so, you know, it's like making time for these things is really important. And so that's also part of like the push and pull, you know? And I think that's just like what it is. That's okay.
so what's your setup right now? So you mentioned you have a manager, the manager has an assistant, and you kind of hire project people to collaborate with on project basis. Do you have anyone else supporting the, I suppose, the process of your brand, of who you are as an artist?
No, that's kind of it, you know? I mean, I don't have like a social media manager or, you know, I will have assistants help me. I will have like, of course, like, so for me, it's different because like it's all project based. So maybe if I'm working on my book publishing, you know, my graphic memoir that came out last year, like, of course, then I might hire a publicist. And they'll have like the publisher will have a team that is supporting me for the rollout of this book and things like that. Or maybe like, you know, if I'm working on certain kind of projects, like we will hire like video people or whatever. So, but I like that it's all in flux. Nothing is permanent. I want like the least amount of overhead.
So what's the hardest thing for you now then with the team and setup that you have, that maybe you think, okay, in 5 years, I would like also to figure out this thing?
I don't know. I get a little superstitious talking about the future.
Well, with the future in the name's up.
Like, I think I just want to, I don't know. It's a tricky thing. Like, I've never been a person like, oh, this is what I want. I want to do a building or I want this collaboration. Like, I didn't know I had a Nike shoe that came out last year. I didn't even know that was on my bucket list, but it was, of course, because I'm inherently a hip hop basketball, you know, pop culture, like, you know, kid from Cleveland and worship Nikes and the people. And so, of course, but I never like had it as this, but I think, you know, through osmosis and like organically, when you are making, you know, it started with like a basketball mural that I did in 2018. And then that led me to do a charity basketball court for Kevin Durant, big basketball player. And then that led, so if you kind of let your kind of interests infuse your work organically, I think that then things will kind of happen in these kind of magical ways that aren't so magical actual.
I love this in the way he described very serendipitous approach to work, that you never know what the end destination is, but you should set up the path through your passion, curiosities, what your values are, what's important for you, who you are as a person, where the world is, that will lead you to the right places. You kind of if you put the right things in place, you'll get to the right direction. I have one last question.
One has their different ways of kind of approaching things, of course. Like, well, for what works for me doesn't work for the next person, and you figure out that style and approach as you go as well.
Love it. Well, I have one last question left for you, which that's very good. And that's the more wonderful people who come on our podcast, which is a bit philosophical. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I don't know. That's too big of a question. I would just say that I would love to end the suffering that is happening in Gaza right now, and free the hostages, and the suffering in Sudan, and I would hope that all people live a free life with self-determination and have food and water, and that's what's on my mind right now. So
I could not agree more with you. To end the suffering would be probably one thing that could just put the world in such a better place. Thank you so much, Timothy. It was nice to meet and such a pleasure hearing your thinking behind the thinking. And thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and also the practical, the business side of being an artist, because you're an example to so many creatives who are listening to us, who are watching us. And you just, it looks like you figured it all out. And this journey obviously took you so long to get to the place where you are. So it's good to hear how many different bits you need to put in place to actually be where you are. And so thank you for sharing this. And thank you for being such a wonderful inspiration to all of us.
so much. It's so good to be here.
Thanks everyone for watching and listening. And hopefully you enjoyed our conversation. Please follow Timothy on all social networks. Is it Instagram your main place?
Just my name. Yeah.
As always, thanks for watching and until next time.